When my husband left for abroad, the silence in the house grew heavier than I had imagined. In the beginning, I thought I would manage. We talked every night, sent each other small messages during the day, and shared photos to feel close despite the distance. But as weeks passed, his calls became shorter, sometimes hurried, and sometimes skipped altogether because of his busy schedule. I would wait with the phone in my hand, hoping for his voice, only to sleep in disappointment when the call never came. The days stretched on, filled with routines that felt empty. Cooking for one, sleeping in a half-empty bed, and facing a house that once echoed with laughter but now felt lifeless. I tried distracting myself with chores, visiting relatives, even watching dramas late into the night, but none of it filled the quiet ache inside me. Loneliness was no longer just a feeling. It had started to shape my days and nights. In those days, my husband's friend began to appear more often. He was someone I had known for years, trusted because my husband trusted him, and familiar enough to make me feel at ease. Sometimes he would drop by to check if I needed groceries, or fix a light bulb, or bring some small thing from the market. At first, I thought of it as simple kindness, something a friend would naturally do when another was away. But slowly, I began to notice the difference. He asked questions my husband had stopped asking, about how I was feeling, if I was eating well, if I was sleeping peacefully. His words felt comforting, not because they were extraordinary, but because they came at a time when I desperately needed someone to listen. I started to notice myself looking forward to his visits. A small knock on the door would break the endless monotony of silence. We would sit in the living room, talk over tea, laugh about trivial things, and share thoughts that had been locked inside me for weeks. He had a way of making me feel that my voice mattered, that I was seen, even in the middle of my isolation. I knew I should be careful, but the warmth of his presence made me forget my guard. One evening, when the electricity went out, he came by with a lantern. The house was dark, and the quiet hum of the night surrounded us. We sat together, shadows flickering across the walls, and talked more openly than before. He told me stories of his own loneliness, how he too had faced nights where silence pressed in. I listened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was not alone. There was a closeness in that moment that was unspoken, yet undeniable. That night, after he left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were tangled, confused. I told myself it was nothing, just companionship, just a friendship. But deep inside, I knew something was shifting. His presence had become more than a distraction. It had become something I longed for. I felt guilty for even thinking this way, but the heart does not always follow the rules that the mind tries to set. The next day, he came again, bringing some fruits and a smile. We sat as usual, and yet, every glance and every pause in conversation carried an invisible weight. I found myself wondering what he was thinking, if he felt the same storm of emotions that I did. I didn't dare to ask, but I couldn't deny that my life no longer felt as empty as before. His friendship had started to fill the gaps that distance had carved between me and my husband. And so, without even realizing, a new chapter of my life was beginning. One that I hadn't chosen, yet one that I couldn't seem to stop. The evening that changed everything began quietly, almost innocently. He called me and said he had made dinner, and it would be nice if I joined him so that neither of us had to eat alone. I hesitated at first, telling myself it wasn't right, but his tone was gentle and filled with concern. He reminded me that it was only a meal, nothing more, and that I shouldn't be spending all my nights in silence. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, his house felt different from mine. It was warm, filled with small touches of care, soft music in the background, the smell of freshly cooked food drifting through the air, and a sense of comfort that made me lower my guard. He greeted me with a smile that carried no pressure, only kindness. We sat down together, and for the first time in weeks, I ate without feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about old memories, about my husband, about how life changes when people chase their dreams in distant lands. He listened without interruption, never making me feel rushed, never dismissing what I had to say. I realized how rare it was to be heard so fully, and the more he listened, the more I opened up. I spoke of my fears, of the emptiness I felt, and even of my guilt for admitting such feelings. He didn't judge me. Instead, he reassured me that what I felt was human, that being alone for so long could test anyone's heart. Time passed unnoticed. The night grew darker, and the quiet outside made the inside feel even more intimate. A moment came when the laughter faded and silence lingered between us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that carried 1,000 unspoken words. I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw something that mirrored the storm inside me. It was not just sympathy. It was longing, restrained yet undeniable, and my heart raced as I quickly looked away, but the air had already shifted. Every gesture felt heavier. Every glance seemed to carry meaning. He leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, yet I could sense the battle behind his eyes. I felt the same within me, a pull I didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. The boundaries I had always kept so carefully suddenly seemed fragile that I told myself to leave, to end the evening before it crossed into something I would regret. Yet, my feet didn't move. Instead, we continued sitting there, talking in softer tones, our words slower, as if both of us were treading on dangerous ground. The clock ticked on, but neither of us noticed. When it was time to go, he walked me to the door. I thanked him for the dinner, trying to keep my voice steady, but there was a trembling in my chest that betrayed me. He looked at me, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the world had stopped. The distance between us was small, but the emotions that filled that space were immense. Nothing was spoken, nothing was acted upon, yet everything was felt. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't sleep. His face, his words, the way he had looked at me, they replayed in my mind endlessly. I tried to convince myself that it was harmless, that it was only a dinner, but deep inside, I knew something had changed. A line had been crossed, not through actions, but through emotions. I was no longer just a lonely wife waiting for her husband's call. I had begun to feel something I wasn't supposed to, and the weight of it both terrified and excited me. The next morning, when the phone rang and I heard my husband's voice, I felt a pang of guilt. He spoke quickly, distracted, promising to send money soon and asking about practical things. I answered dutifully, but my heart wasn't fully there. Part of me was still at that dinner table, still in the quiet tension of that night. I realized then that I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, and I didn't know if I had the strength to step back. The days that followed felt strange, like I was walking through two separate lives at once. On the surface, everything looked normal. I woke up, went to work, came home, and tried to keep the same rhythm as before. My partner greeted me with warmth, asking about my deliveries, telling me about their day, and smiling like nothing had changed. But inside me, something had shifted. A secret had settled into my chest, heavy and uncomfortable, and it followed me everywhere. That I told myself it was just one night, that nothing serious had happened, that I could put it behind me if I just tried hard enough. But the truth was, the memory of it lingered, pulling at me like a tide. The way they had looked at me, the way they made me feel, noticed, wanted, alive, it was intoxicating in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me craved that feeling again. It didn't take long before I found myself back in that same neighborhood, under the same flickering hallway light, pizza bag in hand. This time, I didn't even hesitate when they invited me inside. I told myself I was just being polite, that it was nothing more than stopping in to chat for a few minutes. But deep down, I knew I was lying. I was choosing to step back into temptation. The pattern grew quickly. A delivery here, a text message there, and soon enough, I was making excuses to visit even when it wasn't on the schedule. I crafted little lies without thinking, working late, stuck on extra runs, bike troubles, and my partner believed them every time. Their trust was a shield I hid behind. Even as I chipped away at it with every dishonest word. First, I convinced myself that I still had control. I could draw lines, keep things casual, stop whenever I wanted. But lines blurred faster than I expected. What had started as harmless conversations turned into longer evenings, and longer evenings turned into something more. Each time, I promised myself it would be the last, but somehow, there was always a next time. Back at home, the guilt started to leak into everything. I caught myself being distant, distracted, avoiding my partner's eyes when they asked how my night had been. Simple questions made my stomach twist because I knew that every answer I gave was half a lie. Sometimes, I'd reach for their hand and then pull back, afraid they'd feel the truth in my touch. Other times, I overcompensated, being extra attentive, showering them with affection, trying to prove to myself that I still loved them. But no matter what I did, the weight of what I was hiding never went away. My partner began to notice small changes, even if they didn't say anything outright. They'd pause a little longer when I walked in late, their eyes searching my face as though trying to read something I wasn't saying. They asked gently if I was tired, if work was stressing me, if I needed a break. I nodded, grateful for their kindness. But inside I felt smaller every day, knowing I was betraying the one person who truly cared for me. The more I tried to balance both sides of my life, the harder it became. With the three men, I felt a rush of excitement, like I was someone new, someone free from responsibility. But when I was home, the silence pressed against me, reminding me of everything I stood to lose. I could barely sleep, lying awake with my thoughts twisting into knots, my mind replaying every choice I had made. There were nights when I stared at my phone, torn between deleting their numbers or sending another message. I wanted to stop. I wanted to rewind to the moment before I ever stepped inside that apartment, but it was already too late. The secret had taken root, and I didn't know how to escape it without destroying everything around me. The cracks were beginning to show. My partner's questions became less casual, their eyes a little more guarded. The trust they had given me so freely was starting to waver, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth slipped out. Every lie, every excuse, every stolen moment was building toward an inevitable end. And deep down, I knew that when that moment came, nothing would ever be the same again. The end came more suddenly than I expected. I had been telling myself I could keep both lives separate forever, balancing on that fragile line. But deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. Secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully you try to bury them. It was a late evening when the first crack split wide open. I had claimed I was running extra deliveries, but my partner grew suspicious and decided to check for themselves. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet changes in me over the past weeks that had finally piled up too high to ignore. Whatever it was, they found me, standing in that apartment, surrounded by the same three men who had first pulled me inside. My partner's face appeared in the doorway like a mirror shattering into 1,000 pieces. The silence in that moment was deafening. The men shifted uncomfortably, the music still humming faintly in the background, but all I could see was the look in my partner's eyes. Shock, disbelief, and then a pain so sharp it nearly broke me where I stood. I opened my mouth to explain, to stammer out some excuse, but the words never came. There was nothing I could say that could erase what they had just witnessed. They turned and left without a word, and though I chased after them, begging them to stop, begging them to listen, they wouldn't even look at me. I followed them into the street, the night air cold and heavy around us, but every step I took only pushed them further away. By the time I returned home later, the apartment we shared felt emptier than it ever had before. Their suitcase was gone. So was their trust. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of regret. I sent messages, I left voicemails, I even showed up at their workplace once, but they refused to answer me. Friends who knew us both looked at me with disappointment, shaking their heads, whispering about betrayal and choices that couldn't be undone. The three men who had once seemed so magnetic faded quickly from my life, their presence reduced to nothing more than echoes of temptation. They had never been the point. It was never about them. It was about me, about the weakness I had allowed to grow unchecked until it destroyed everything I cared about. Nights became the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the sound of their voice, the warmth of their laughter, the trust one had thrown away so carelessly. I replayed every decision in my head, wondering where I could have turned back, where I could have chosen differently. But the truth was always the same. I had been given countless chances to walk away, and I hadn't taken them. Once, in the quiet of my empty apartment, I found myself holding one of their old sweaters. It still carried the faintest trace of their scent, and it was enough to bring me to tears. That was when the reality of what I had lost finally sank in. Love isn't something you can take for granted. Trust isn't something you can bend without breaking. I had been blind to that truth until it was too late. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move forward, though each step felt heavier than the last. Work went on as usual, deliveries, long nights, the same narrow streets, but everything felt different now. Customers smiled, handed me tips, exchanged small talk, but none of it reached me. Every laugh, every glance, every word reminded me of the home I had destroyed with my own choices. Sometimes I imagined what I would say if I had just one more chance to look my partner in the eyes. I'd tell them that I was sorry, truly sorry, not just for what I had done, but for the way I had made them doubt themselves, for the way I had betrayed their kindness. I'd tell them that they were always enough, more than enough, and that it was me who had failed. not them. But chances like that don't come easily once trust has been broken. So I carry the weight of it with me now, every day, as a reminder of the cost of temptation. Love is fragile, and when you choose betrayal, you don't just lose the person you love, you lose the version of yourself that was worthy of them, and that's a loss you can never undo.